The ones who do not adopt AI will have challenges in the future.
It's a disruption, and with many disruptions, it's full of opportunity and concern.
UNDP just published a report called The Next Great Divergence.
It's our assessment that as an upper middle income country, Malaysia is better placed than others in the region.
Huge investment going on into it. And there's the uptake in these data centers huge.
But it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think we just need to be a little bit careful about that with AI.
Artificial intelligence is no longer just the future. Now it's already reshaping communities and governments, whether or not we are up to date with the current affairs. That's why we are here today. Now you are watching Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I'm Amalina Kamal, and of course, I do have two esteemed guests on the show with me to discuss it all. Joining me is UNDP's United Nations Development Programme's resident representative to Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Edward Vrkic. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here this morning.
It's a pleasure to have you here as well, especially for this particular discourse. And I believe that you have something to share to our audience, particularly on how we have fared, I suppose, past couple of years at least, in terms of addressing the gaps and our readiness, right? So next to Edward, we have Akhil Gupta, SME Association Malaysia's representative, as well as PCOM's Deputy Chair of AI. Akhil, welcome to Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to you.
Gentlemen, of course, before we start this serious discussion, I do want to break the ice by talking about what AI represents. Now, we obviously know it's not the concept that's new, but when people talk about it, they tend to think that it's like a magic button, right? When you adopt it in your practice, then everything changes overnight. So I go to our guests to ask and understand what they think about AI or how they define it when people ask them about those.
It's a great question. Look, for me, the immediate response is it's the new frontier. It's a disruption, and with many disruptions, it's full of opportunity and concern. I think the question of uptake and applicability and use, we're still at a very early stage of AI. The question of how it's used varies by context and by country, within countries. The way that it's governed, the way that it's managed is still evolving. It's a very exciting time. I think it's easy to swing one way or the other about what the future of AI looks like, but I think the reality is far more complicated. I think it's a bit of a patchwork. At the moment, when I talk to industry and people like Akhil, what's very obvious to myself when I engage on these sorts of issues is that there's no magic bullet or button on AI, and we are at the moment talking about LLMs. That seems to be the focus, but that is just one tip of how AI is being used and how it's changing many things in large and small ways.
And Akhil, do you echo what Edward just described to us, or do you think AI is just another new race that businesses have to adopt just to stay relevant?
I wouldn't dispute what you just said, which is AI is important to stay relevant in terms of businesses adopting AI. But I echo what Edward just said. It is still at a nascent stage. Now, when we talk about the large enterprises with their budgets, there's a lot of investment going on, so the awareness is pretty much there. It's just about them adopting it fully in their organizations. But from the SME's perspective, it is still a bit obscure, right? This concept is some people, there are very, very few who've started adopting it. Majority of them are just observing it, and there's still quite a few of them who don't know about it. So it's at a very early stage right now. There's a lot, as Edward just mentioned, LLM, which is GPTs, ChatGPT or the Geminis of the world. That's the most common ones. But applying beyond that, there are many tools in the world today. Applying beyond that in the regular business, that is still very, very nascent, and people just know about the LLMs.
Oh, yeah. It's scratching the surface there, right?
It's just scratching the surface.
But the full potential of AI is beyond that. And to be fair, if you understand what it's really all about, is to complement and not necessarily replace existing practices. You did mention something in terms of the not knowing. Do you think the not knowing is purely, at least on the Malaysian level, purely boiled down to gaps when it comes to our national policy? Because at a national level, how would you see the engagement between SMEs and the government? And are there any, areas of concern that we can, push for this adoption early on, later than, when AI globally is already at a certain stage, the intermediate stage, but, locally we're still like premature?
Actually, the Malaysian government is putting a lot of effort, a lot of investment, a lot of programs and initiatives to make sure that we are leading the region in terms of being an AI innovation hub, Malaysia being an AI innovation hub regionally. I think globally, I mean, even the Western economies, we can't say that majority of them have already adopted AI. I mean, globally also, not more than 30% have really embarked on AI, right? In Malaysian context, officially 26% of the enterprises have embarked on AI, okay, right? But I think, as I said, earlier the focus was subsidizing the software from the government. The programs were revolving around subsidizing the softwares which lead to application of AI, right? But now the new programs that are launched under the AI roadmap, they talk about upskilling. And one of the key points here is upskilling and creating awareness with the leaders of the business, because it all trickles down from the top. If the leaders know what is the real benefit that AI is going to bring to the business, then they are the decision makers. They are the drivers of the business. And that will really help. And I think now the government is putting a lot of effort in creating that awareness.
We do know that the roadmap is set to, see a new, I suppose, facelift. I'm not too sure, or probably an extension of what the last one was. It was between 2021 to 2025. We've yet to know what the coming, I suppose, trajectory for the nation would be. But in terms of seeing the immediate value in AI, for SME level, what are they looking at the moment?
Are you talking about the government? What are they looking at?
The government, and then what in response the SMEs would want from the government beyond initial pumping of the funds.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So most businesses would want the grants and the incentives and the funding, right? So the government today is looking at upskilling a lot, upskilling the talent. And a lot of investment is going, or the programs and initiatives, as I mentioned a while ago, is going into talent upskilling. Yeah. Including, giving some grants up to almost 2 million for companies who develop AI applications by themselves and own it, right? So the government is encouraging deep technical, creating deep technical expertise in Malaysia itself, in the country, locally, to make sure that Malaysia is not a consumption economy, but is a creator economy, right? Well. Plus, of course, a lot of talent upskilling of existing workforce to repurpose them to be legitimate or good users of AI, while also investing in the fresh talent in the universities to upskill them and make them AI ready when they move into the workforce.
Now we go to Edward, because UNDP just published a report called The Next Great Divergence, Why AI May Widen the Inequality Between Countries. Now, of course, this is a more regional level look, but when we have that sort of helicopter view, then we will really know how competitive we are in this particular context, right? Edward, can you perhaps share a little bit of the key findings about the report and also why this now?
Sure. It's really a reference to the Industrial Revolution, the Great Divergence. There's been much publicised and written about this over the last number of decades, but really what is very apparent is that, as we've seen with other great disruptions and divergences, there are some countries that are very well placed to capitalise on that. The Industrial Revolution is an obvious example, one that's been much studied. We're seeing the same sorts of aspects with the AI rollout and revolution, if you will. There are some countries that are very well placed and some that are not, some that have the governance and infrastructure and architecture and some that do not. Just to pick up on Akhil's point about Malaysia, I actually agree. I think Malaysia is really well placed regionally. It's our assessment that as an upper middle income country, Malaysia is better placed than others in the region, far better. There's a few things that are impressive. One, and on the back of the ASEAN chairing last year, I think Malaysia really used that as an opportunity. I think PM Anwar did a great job on that. their focus, as many countries in the region, is around AI safety and regulation, and they're looking at that, and there's concerns about bullying and harassment and the misuse of the technology. Malaysia's dealing with that. It's trying to. The second is that I don't think there's a big rollout. I think it's going to be learning as you're doing on this one. And I think, to be fair to all countries in the region, they're all grappling with this because it is a game changer. I think the question about SME take-up is an important one, and it demonstrates the practical everyday application. But it's not just a local level question about the use of AI, it's also a national and a regional question, and the interoperability. And then there are other issues around things like data sovereignty and compute and environmental impacts, etc. On the report, what we flag is very much that there's a number of case studies. I'd encourage people to have a look at it, and certainly the summary. But there is a number of countries that are very well positioned because they're engaging on the governance, the regulation, the infrastructure, the environmental considerations. And they're looking at, as Akhil quite rightly points out, as we're doing in Malaysia, is upskilling. There's this idea. And what we're seeing is a change in the labour market. Now, there is a larger, longer term question as where the labour market will adapt and what the impact of greater automation means for economies, particularly in Southeast Asia, where we're still very labour intensive. There are opportunities to change the shape of work, the shape of workforces, but also open up new frontiers. What we do know from historical experience is where we've had disruptions like this, labour markets have adapted, governments have adapted, industry has adapted. It looks different at the other end. I think the point in this is that the point of the report is that it not only highlights the opportunities and the challenges, but it also raises a pivotal question, which is we have a moment, there's a window of opportunity to get ahead of this curve. Malaysia, in the local context, has done very well to try and position itself forward. To be fair, this is a very complicated set of issues. And it is easy to distill them down and say, are people using AI or not? There's a much bigger question as to how it's used, what it looks like, the applicability, the economic impacts. And at the end of the day, what we're saying through the report is, AI has this great opportunity to augment and value add, and to help people and businesses and industry value add to generate greater economic development for a greater number of people.
You've touched a few things in terms of like how the kind of disruptions that we face and where Malaysia is at in terms of where it's, I suppose, benefiting from AI. But as you mentioned, we still do not, to simplify, we still do not have a focus, right? Especially when it comes to the national approaches, it seems to me it's only focused on digital resilience and safety, not so much on the augmentation of the systems. Or maybe it's being underreported, I'm not too sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. We go to Edward. Is there any areas that Malaysia did well that requires more attention to it so that a lot of FDIs can come in to help make the environment more robust, at least the production environment more robust? Yeah,
it's a really good question. I think I would just pick up on your point of maybe all of us focusing on safety and regulation because that's what the media has picked up on. And to be fair, I think it's a concern for parents and for industry and businesses and people in the workplace. There are many examples of cyberbullying and the misuse of AI, and we've seen this recently all over the world. And Malaysia's no exception. I think the Malaysian government's been very, very forward in wanting to address that, recognising, as other countries such as Australia and the region have. Singapore is doing the same. The question about what it's doing, we shouldn't lose sight. Malaysia is emerging as quite the investment destination for big tech around data centres, compute power, the questions around upskilling and workforce. There's a lot of investment going on. There are different parts of government responsible for different parts of that equation. The opportunity is to continue crowding in the foreign investment, but also stimulating local investment. And Akhil's probably better positioned to talk about some of that aspect. But I do think that it's important for us to take stock of other things that are happening. For example, the re-education, the upskilling, the wanting to roll this out, some of the concessions that are being proposed, some of the incentives that are being proposed. So there is the focus on regulation and safety, but there are other things that are happening to try and encourage the uptake and with it greater efficiency and ultimately greater competitiveness in the region.
Well, capacity, sustainability and data sovereignty, I suppose, is one key area. We go to Akhil. Do you see the practice being made more accessible to those who are supposed to adopt these or supposed to be assisting the environment, to making it more robust? I'm not just talking about the official point of view, the government, the authorities, right? But actual people who work behind them.
You're talking about the people who work behind the government, or the people like the businesses, the agencies?
The businesses. Okay, agencies is probably an extension to the government, but actual businesses.
So actual businesses today, let's talk about the SMEs, right? Actual businesses today, they are stretched. There is a huge skill gap in these SMEs today. There's lack of in-house technical expertise, right? And they're looking up to the government not only for funding today, they're looking up to the government for, how to bridge the gap in terms of expertise, right? SMEs are already stretched. The IT adoption, I'll give you a very good statistic. IT adoption in the manufacturing sector is 10%. Now imagine the IT adoption is 10%. What we're talking about, AI adoption here. So even if simple IT adoption is 10%, AI is still far away. But then SMEs, if there's proper awareness created on the benefits of AI, their challenges, one is to create awareness, one is to build in-house technical expertise, and the other is to data. Now let's talk about data. In Australia, we call it data, right? So in terms of data readiness, in SMEs, there's more often the data does not exist. It's not recorded properly. Even if it's recorded, it's not structured or organized properly. And without data, whether it's a chatbot or whether it's an ops bot like HR bot or SOP bot, you cannot use anything unless you have data available, organized and structured in the organization. So I think from the industry perspective, these are a few areas, which is creating awareness. Second is data readiness. And the third is skills.
I mean, obviously, what you just mentioned is the thing that breaks the confidence, right? Especially when you want to say that you're forward thinking when it comes to AI adoption, but you don't have the infrastructure to protect the data. Not just protect it, but also like how you work around the data, how you build that data. But over the past years, isn't it that Malaysia has been growing when it comes to having to call itself a data center hub? I know the government has this aspiration of building data centers within the country. Are the talks on the ground reflecting of what has been mentioned?
I mean, there's a lot of investment that has come in. I mean, I represent PCOM, and we have a digital infra chapter which works very closely with the data center providers and builders in the country, and a huge investment going on into it. And there's the uptake in these data centers huge because of the natural resources, because of the support by the government, whether it's energy and water. But there is a huge investment. And on the ground, there's a lot of uptake. Literally, data center investments are running full. So the uptake is heavy. So on the ground, there's a huge upside when it comes to AI compute power or AI infrastructure.
Right. But okay, how can we ensure that SMEs are not being sidelined by larger corporations here when it comes to having all these opportunities being put at play, right? Because obviously now, outside of AI, we have a major issue when it comes to government procurements and all that, right? So we do not want people who are supposed to be benefiting from grants to lose out on this hope, right? So how can we ensure that this doesn't, whatever you just mentioned doesn't sideline the SMEs?
See, one of the things is the democratization of AI.
Okay.
Right? For larger firms, as I said, with big budgets, can afford the implementation or accessing AI infrastructure. But SMEs definitely have a cost constraint or a budget constraint. And that is where public compute or subsidized compute, access to compute from the government can make a lot of difference, which will lead to democratization of AI, which means even the SMEs or even startups, single person startup who are just conceptualizing some applications and they want to build some solutions around it, they can access the public compute, which is subsidized by the government. So I think that will be a big game changer, because right now the larger firms are investing and they're evolving very rapidly, transforming very rapidly. But the smaller firms, and particularly in the SME sector, do not have those budgets. And if they do not evolve, it is over a period of time, it will lead to them being low performers, the ones who do not adopt AI will have challenges in the future, and the survivability will be a very, very important thing to look at.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you raise, actually, just reflecting on it. I think the question for the big question in this is how do you create an
Even playing
ecosystem?
field?
Well, how do you create the ecosystem that nurtures innovation? And a lot of the innovation comes from SMEs. We know from around the world that governments often work best where they facilitate or they nurture an environment that creates innovation. Malaysia's in a great space for that. And I agree with Akhil, the big end of town is moving quickly, they have the resources, but it's no different from the finance sector or the engineering sectors or others that we see around the world. The question about how much you nurture and what that looks like is a question of incentive and policy levers. And it's easy to apply a single metric to this, but it's not the case. And I think the question of uptake with SME is an interesting one you put, because ultimately the use of AI is to, one, upskill, two, to build capability, and three, to improve efficiencies. I think when you're dealing with SMEs, the variety of business interests that they have and the things that they do as contributing to the economy varies such that they'll all use it in slightly different ways. And I think we need to be a little bit careful about falling into this idea that AI rolls out and everything changes. I think different parts of the economy will use AI in very, very different ways, ultimately for the same types of reasons around efficiency and profitability, etc. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think we just need to be a little bit careful about that with AI.
Is profitability a thing? Like, especially when it comes to SMEs in adopting AI, I suppose solutions here, because then you'll fall back to not just productivity, because it goes back to cost. Not just profitability, but also cost management and everything.
Of course, efficiency is one such thing, but if you look at the current application of AI in service sector within SME, whether it's a beauty salon, whether it's a clinic, it's more about chatbots. It's more about like booking time slots and all that. That really gives them literally, as per one of the studies, 50 hours of saving per week, right? So that means one person's job gets saved by just using the chatbots, right? Whether it's for booking or answering customer queries, right? So from the perspective of ROI, SMEs have not even looked at predictive analytics, right? Supply chain analytics, right? There's so much of analytics when it comes to consumption, demand, supply chain, logistics. There's just so much yet to be explored, right? So the ROI, as I said, is already, they can see it, provided they're adopting it.
Yeah,
right?
But the adoption takes better awareness. I mean, I think simpler terms and the accessibility of the pathway towards it needs to be made more simpler, right?
Yeah.
Sure, but it's also a question of incentive. And I think when you're talking about measures of profit, the question is what is the incentive to uptake a different way of doing business and whether that will lead to an increase in profitability. I think the other thing to maybe reflect on as part of this discussion is that the changing nature of employment and jobs as well. So AI is not just about the profits, it's about changing not only how we work, but the sorts of opportunities that people have before them. And that in of itself raises some very interesting possibilities for economic growth, development, well-being, mobility for people, and accessing different parts of the labour force, getting more people involved in the economic trajectory of the country.
Right. Talking about having to level the playing field in terms of the social inequalities here, and then having to close the income bracket, the gaps within each income bracket better. As you mentioned, Malaysia ranks upon the upper middle income average when it comes to AI adoption. However, how can the government, introduce models or policies that don't necessarily stifle innovation?
The question of equality and level the playing field is really about creating greater equality of access to the opportunity. And there's a number of instruments that governments have, whether they be around regulatory and legislative instruments, where they change the law or enforce regulation, or whether they create incentives, for example, tax breaks or grant mechanisms, whatever the case may be, which stimulates uptake. I know in our own work we're very focused with And we're partnering very closely with government and various parts of government to try and lift the floor on some of these things. We're looking at the application, for example, around social protection, where we can assist government in using AI and make sure the right money gets to the right people, or the right resource, the right benefits. That is to lift the floor. There's no reason that can't apply to business as well, where you have some businesses, startups are a good example, where they offer incentives or easier access to various mechanisms, grants, whatever the case may be. And that becomes really important. So the question is not necessarily government being in a position where it spoons up things to everyone. Rather, how does it create greater equity of access to some of these opportunities? And that comes through advocacy, it comes through accessibility, making things a bit simpler to access sometimes, reducing regulation. And Malaysia's well on that path. So I think it's important to stress this point, is that comparative to other countries in ASEAN, Malaysia is at the top in terms of AI readiness, probably as good as you're going to get in the region right now.
Still on the social inequality aspect, do you think AI can be best used to also address our low-income groups who are, sidelined or alienated from the data itself? I mean, the sampling that we get.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly some of the problems that we're working on government with. The idea of wanting to identify, so having a clearer sense of who is in need and those target groups, and that ranges, right? So we have women at the top of that, people with disabilities, you have the gig economy, the gig workers. Then you have, on top of all of that, what Malaysia has is what the rest of the world has, which is an ageing demographic, which raises a whole other set of questions around health, well-being, longer employment in the workforce, because people are living longer, right? It makes, so I mean, I don't want to retire at 65 if I'm going to live to 100. There's some of these questions become very obvious. The question for government isn't the panacea to all problems, right? It requires private sector, civil society, international actors. We've all got to pull in the same direction. The question about the redistribution of some of these resources is something AI can help with. Now, there are examples in the world where it's been used very well and some where it hasn't been used very well. Some of the work that we're pioneering with government here is about greater clarity on where the need is, greater checks and balances on how those resources are used, and greater investment using some of these AI and predictive tools, making sure that the right public money or the right public resources get to those in need, not with the view of creating long-term dependency or welfare, but rather facilitating the step up, not a handout, but a hand up. And I think this is really important, and there's no reason that can't stretch to other parts of the economy. But in terms of social equity, I mean, that's part of the work that we are doing with government, is to try and use some of these tools in a way that shines a light on where it needs to get, make sure that the right resources go to the right people.
When we talk about the government support, everybody talks about grants and incentives. Yeah. Now let's talk about literacy. Now, whether it is literacy in terms of just normal education, now more than ever, digital literacy is important. So it's not just about, and the government is making efforts to do that. I've had some discussions with the government agencies representing PCOM and SME as well at times. I've had discussions where we're talking about how to inculcate or incorporate digital skills at the primary school level. And there are certain steps that have already been taken, and a lot of discussions are happening on the ground, how that digital skills can be incorporated at primary school, secondary school, and of course the colleges and the universities. Now, countries change only when there's investment in education. It's not about the economic environment. It's not about the investment into data centers. It is about that, but it's not just that. And it's not just about handouts, incentives, and grants. It's about the education system. And one of the things that I'm proud of and quite impressed in Malaysia is that real discussions happening on the ground between the industry associations, between the academia and the government. This three stakeholders are having real discussions on the ground on how to make sure that Malaysia becomes a digitally literate country.
Would you say that there's no divide then? I mean, between these multiple groups, the academia, the industry associations, and the government? I mean, it's like having to say that everything's perfect, but, A lot of people would beg to differ.
AI is a disruption. And often the benefits of a disruption is that it brings alignment because stakeholders become more vulnerable, right? And when there is vulnerability and stakeholders open up, right? So right now, because of AI being such a major disruption globally, industry and academia and government, whether it's directly through the government ministries or with the agencies, they're all collaborating together on the same page at the same point or time to discuss how to make sure all work together to make the country progress towards being an AI-ready country, right? Of course, we talked about talent. And ultimately, that's going to benefit the economy. As per the new budget 2026, 50% tax deduction for SMEs who adopt or invest into AI and cybersecurity is a great example of that. Now, this may not be the only thing that one needs to do or the government needs to do, but there is an intent and a lot of out-of-the-box thinking that the government is doing. So ultimately, as I would say, it's about creating awareness. It's about structuring the data. It's about upskilling. Mm-hmm. These are the three areas. AI is nothing without data, and SMEs struggle with that. So creating the awareness to how to record and structure the data is important. Creating the awareness with the leadership of the SMEs or any organization to use AI and how to apply it in the business, different areas of the business or the organization, as well as what are the benefits surrounding it after post-application. And as I said, getting the talent AI ready.
Keep up the momentum is what you're saying.
It is about keeping up the momentum.
We have less than 5 minutes, but I do want to go to each of our guests here in terms of what they make about how we can propel further better in the future together with AI at hand. When we talk about having to scale and progress in this particular region alone, we can't talk about not having to assist the neighboring counterparts, right? Because a lot of our, I suppose, success also boils down to how we work better with our neighbors as well. Edward, we go to you. What makes AI different from past technological shifts in how it widens or closes the gaps between the development of each country here, and in what ways can we utilize AI to propel each other together?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and it raises the question of not only cooperation, but the harmonisation of things like legislation and regulation and barriers to entry, or reducing barriers to entry for investment in particular. I think the AI is interesting, and just to pick up on Akhil's point, I think it's important to not mistake robust public discussion with a divergence of opinion. I think you're right. I think ultimately everyone will start to align. I remember when the internet became a big thing. I do remember being in my early 20s, people debating about whether it was a good thing, would it last, would it not, and the idea now that you don't have the internet is not one that anyone would take seriously. And I think AI will eventually become that, and I still think we're a decade or two away from that. The question about neighbours, it's an interesting one, because what we're seeing with AI is not just the technology, but the infrastructure and the governance around that technology. So we do know it's environmentally very intensive. A large data centre will use up to 100 megawatts a day. That would power over 500,000 homes a day, right? So the energy, and then you have the water, and most of that is used for cooling and keeping this thing going. So this is a whole set of problems that we've not dealt with on this scale. So the energy security is an issue. There is, and that you're seeing that spill out in things like the ASEAN power grid, where countries are starting to say, well, actually, we need a redundancy within a group of countries, so if there's a failing or if there's a need for more, we're able to supply each other. The question about harmonisation of regulation legislation is one that's front and centre with all. When I talk to my country colleagues across ASEAN and Asia Pacific, there's a real sense that we need to have a sense that legislation and regulation and governance structures are kind of similar, because that helps with making sure that we manage the evolution of this in a more uniform way. The speed at which this is evolving is I think, catching us all off a little guard, to be honest with you. It's very exciting. It is a bit of a gold rush, and you'll hear that a lot. But as we know from gold rushes, not everyone gets rich, right? And you're seeing this in countries. Right. So the question around infrastructure and governance, not only among countries but within countries, is interesting. Some are much better positioned. Some have the infrastructure ready to go. Some have the governance and the regulatory capacity ready to go. others do not. Some are catching up, some are still trying to work it out. That question of regional cooperation is now quite critical in a way that it was for energy, in a way that it's been for other parts of economic and social development, political stabilisation and harmonisation. And I do think that governments in the region, my experience, my view and the view of my colleagues is they're all very seized with this question, because attached to it is not just things around safety and stability and security, but it's about being competitive, and no one wants to be left behind when there's such a dynamic disruption.
Right.
So I think you'll see a greater convergence of that moving forward. We're already seeing it. ASEAN is one example. You're seeing it through various UN bodies and APEC and other bodies as well. So watch this space. I think that will continue for some time.
Yeah, because in the last sitting, the ASEAN sitting, we were also talking about having to beef up our digital economy conditions and considerations, right? How can we ensure better fluidity? I know on the SME side, usually the problem is between end to end, right? The taxing, even regulations of each country might be a little bit different that delays the delivery, right? So Akhil, last words from you. Similar question. How is AI different from past technological shifts, and how can we ensure there's better cohesion and better synergy between the countries that, not just within domestically, but the neighboring counterparts having to push for AI?
AI is an evil must, right? As we've already figured it out. Now, the word evil does not stand well, but it's an imperative, right, for survival in the future. Now, collaboration between countries is extremely important, and the good thing about ASEAN region is that they are engaging actively, just like European Council. They're all in ASEAN as a region, and the countries within ASEAN are meeting regularly. Like even recently, there was a ASEAN, all the countries came together, all the digital ministries or IT ministries came together, and Malaysia is leading that initiative, has been identified as one of the countries which will lead the digital initiative. So there is headway in that sense, and there is collaboration, concerted effort being put on in this area. But from the SME perspective, I'll still go back to SMEs, because that's the real thing on the ground, right? The reality on the ground is that SMEs, one thing that favors Malaysia is many countries in the world, and I read one report, access to healthcare, access to electricity, access to education. There's a big difference from how one country performs in this area versus the other. And in Malaysia, in my own personal evaluation and assessment or observation, access to healthcare, access to education in terms of primary and secondary education and even universities, as well as access to electricity, something as simple as that, or water, is very much there. Even if we're talking about the kampong, right? It's very much there. So for AI to reach is going to be much faster in Malaysia in terms of technology adoption or knowledge or education. Digital literacy is going to be much faster in comparison to other countries within the region. Mm-hmm. So that's my perspective. That's like a layman view.
Okay. But a very hopeful one. We always question and we always try to read between the lines, and sometimes we tend to get a little bit skeptical on progress, right? But understandably, because, AI adoption, at least in Malaysia, is already underway as it is regionally. And of course, for us, it's a bigger sort of pressure because we have set ourselves to become an AI nation by 2030, and that's not too long. That's like what? Less than 4 years?
Less than 4 years, yeah.
Less than 4 years. But of course, with whatever we've discussed together on the show, I hope that our audience will understand that we're not starting from zero. There is already progress, and there is a position that we're at. We just have to remain focused and remain our momentum, right? Well, thank you so much to our guests again on set. I'd like to thank UNDP's resident representative to Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, Edward Vrkic. Thank you so much for your insights and for joining us on
Absolute pleasure.
Beyond the
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akhil Gupta, for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. SME Association Malaysia's representative, as well as PCOM, Deputy Chair of AI.
It is a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to our audience, if you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell. If you haven't already, you'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news reports, as well as what we have discussed on set here today will be delivered to you. Now, my name is Amalina Kamal, and we'll see you in the next episode.